Weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So as we mentioned with George Weigel in our conversation about the selection of the next pope, in advance of the funeral mass for Pope Francis over the weekend, Trump had a pictured and widely distributed, was that picture, of a one-on-one sit-down with Ukrainian President Zelensky. After which, Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared on Meet the Press to endure Kristen Welker and had this to say about the state of play in trying to achieve a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
What is the timeline? Are you talking weeks or months? How long are you willing to give them to reach a peace agreement?
Well, I always think it's silly to set a specific date or whatever, but I can just tell you that almost 100 days into this presidency, the president has dedicated a tremendous amount of time and energy to this. And we think we brought the sides closer than they've been in a very long time, but we're not there yet, and it needs to start happening. We need to start. I think this is going to be a very critical week. This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in, or if it's time to sort of focus on some other issues that are equally, if not more important in some cases. But we want to see it happen. There are reasons to be optimistic, but there are reasons to be realistic, of course, as well. We're close, but we're not close enough.
Well, and after that, we get the news that just came over the transom I mentioned before our news, which was Putin announcing a unilateral 3-day ceasefire beginning May 8th and challenging Zelensky to agree to it a day after Marco Rubio said we're close, but we're not close enough, and this week is critical. Very interesting for insight into Putin's play here and other matters. Please be joined for a weekly conversation with Stephen Bucci, who served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. Now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you for having me back on the show.
So you'll pardon my skepticism, but for some reason I don't see Putin as a preemptive party when it comes to negotiating peace. So why the proposal for the 3-day ceasefire now?
I think Putin is just playing with people's heads now. He seems to have gotten away with agreeing to a ceasefire a while ago and continuing to shoot throughout the whole time. And he's playing with folks. And until the president, our president, puts him in a box in some way or another, he's going to keep doing it. He's not a good faith partner. The only negotiating partner that's worse than Putin are the mullahs in Tehran. That's not a real high bar to exceed. It's not useful.
So this is him trying to sort of keep everybody in the fold. We're ready to walk away, says Trump and Rubio. Trump last week and Rubio yesterday on Meet the Press. No, don't walk away. Look, I'm offering a 3-day ceasefire, and it allows essentially things to remain in stasis.
Yeah, and he's trying to make it look, at least to his own people, if not to the world, that Zelensky's really the problem here. Look, I'm not saying, for those who think Zelensky should just lay down and give Putin what he's got and call it a day, Zelensky still has not shown a willingness to do that. It's hard for me to, hate him over that. But it's not like the Ukrainians are really the problem here. The problem is Vladimir Putin and the Russians, not the other way around. And, anybody who thinks differently, I challenge you to justify to me another sovereign nation invading their neighbor and taking about a third of their country. And how is that ever justified under not just international law, just natural moral law? It's just I'm not a fan of this war. I'd love it to end today. I think it's a horrific thing that has caused way more death and destruction than anybody ever believed it would. But, no offense to the president, this is not Zelensky's fault.
Well, and Sergei Lavrov was on Face the Nation yesterday for a rare interview. Gee, I wonder why he chose Margaret Brennan for a rare interview. And his point was basically a recitation of the propaganda we heard from the Russians at the outset of the war. And the conditions for a ceasefire were twofold. One is weapons have to stop being sent by the West to the Ukrainians. And two, they need to make sure that there is an honoring of commitments in a way that wasn't previously. Here's a little bit of Lavrov.
President Putin immediately supported President Trump's proposal a few weeks ago to establish a 30-day ceasefire, provided we do not repeat mistakes of the last 10 years, when deals were signed, and then Ukraine would violate those deals with the support and with encouragement from Biden administration and from European countries. This was the fate of the deal of February 2014. Then this was the fate of the Minsk agreements, and this was the fate of the deal reached on the basis of Ukrainian proposals in Istanbul in April 2022. Mm-hmm. So President Putin said, ceasefire, yes, but we want the guarantees that the ceasefire would not be used again to beef up Ukrainian military, and that the supply of arms should stop.
Stephen?
Well, look, it's not like the Russians faithfully followed those ceasefires either. In fact, Russia, in most of those, Russia needed the breather more than Ukrainians did. Now it's different. Ukraine's running out of schlitz here trying to get this thing done. But in those earlier ones, it was the Russians who needed the breather, not the Ukrainians. They were the ones getting their backsides handed to them. And now the scale of the Russians' military is finally wearing down the much smaller Ukrainian military. And yeah, look, if I was Vladimir Putin, I'd be a little suspicious too. But, Russia's the one that seems to be continuing to violate these ceasefires. I don't know where Lavrov's getting his information. He's probably making it up at his desk because they tend to do that. But that was kind of ludicrous, but very, very classically Lavrov.
I wanted to just a final word on this. I mean, if this is seen for the transparent stalling tactic and sort of market positioning that it is by Putin, or that it seems to be, then there's some talk about secondary market sanctions on Russia that Trump might impose. But if you're providing advice and counsel to the national security team of the Trump administration, what is the response you would suggest to this overture by Putin and your sort of larger play to try to move this along to some sort of at least intermediate conclusion?
There's got to be some teeth in this thing. We can't just be a neutral, somebody just decides where the table's going to sit to have the chat. Trump has some influence over the Russians economically. And Biden never used that effectively. Trump could. I don't know if he wants to. He still, has folks in his administration who really think that the toad in the road here is Zelensky, not Putin. I'm not sure exactly what the president really thinks, but kind of hoping that I'll put money that if Zelensky agrees to this 3-day ceasefire, that the Russians will violate it. And then when they're called on it, they'll just go, oh, no, we don't agree, or some other, dismissive thing. But Trump is the only one right now in the world who can call Putin on that and to put some pressure on him, whether it's secondary market sanctions. Look, we've said we've got, very strict sanctions on them. We never have really strict sanctions on anybody. We haven't had them on North Korea. We haven't really had them on, I guess the closest we've ever come was on the Iranians during the first Trump administration. Those were pretty tight, and people were following them. But now, nope. It's all of these sanctions regimes are very porous, not hard to get around. That's why so many countries are going around them.
Well, what do you think it said to the world? Because we just had George Weigel on. He's in Rome. He covered the Pope's funeral for MSNBC. But, Zelensky was there and Putin was not. And he said, like, the lowest bottom of the barrel from the administration showed up. What does that say?
Look, I'm not sure, who went to the funeral is really tied directly back to the negotiations on the war. I think that sit down with Zelensky was sort of a target of opportunity. I don't know what came out of it. We haven't really gotten any good reports about that. But I think it's probably not wise to read into every single movement around the globe tied to every single situation in the world. The Pope died, so people came to the funeral. It wasn't that wasn't keyed on, trying to send messaging for Ukraine.
Yeah, well, it probably has something to do with Putin's view of the Catholic Church, too, by the way. But anyway, Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, on with Bartiromo yesterday, and he was pressed by Maria Bartiromo about Hegseth and what's going on at the Department of Defense as the senior leadership team for Hegseth has been exited stage left. Listen to this exchange, get your reaction to Hegseth and DOD.
Pete Hegseth, of course, our defense secretary, has been threatening polygraph tests. He's been firing people who we thought were his allies. What is the state of affairs at the Defense Department right now?
Maria, I introduced Secretary Hegseth at his hearing. I've known him for years. You know what? Let me tell you about the soldiers, sailors, Marines that every day come up to me, come up to him. We just had wounded warriors in the office with the president that say, thank God for Secretary Hegseth. Thank God for President Trump as commander-in-chief. Just 100 days ago, we were more worried about DEI and climate change nonsense. Now we're focused on lethality and winning. That's been, in just over 3 months, the change. And what we owe is the best equipment that is on time, on budget, and lethal to those soldiers and sailors. I'll tell you, a Pentagon that was chaotic was one that had a defense secretary that disappeared for 2 weeks just last year, and nobody knew about it. Pete is leading from the front. He is leading the charge, and he has no tolerance for leaking.
How's he going to replace all those people so fast?
This is a media narrative that we are going to power through. What's that?
Yeah, this is just a media narrative that they're going to power through. Is this just a media narrative with respect to Hegseth and Department of Defense in your view?
Yes and no. Look, I agree with what Waltz was saying there as far as the attitude of the troops and the junior level of the military is thrilled with Secretary Hegseth. And I think the moves he's making to clean up DOD, because DOD had jumped into the whole DEI thing with both feet to the extreme detriment of our military readiness. He's trying to fix that. However, while that may be true, if you don't have your mechanisms in place to actually do that and make those things happen effectively, which is a bureaucratic exercise, which as much as everybody says we hate bureaucracy, it doesn't make it go away. You have to work it and use it. And right now, that aspect of the Department of Defense does not seem to be operating that effectively. So, look, none of those people he fired were senatorially confirmed. Those are all people he can hire in a minute. He just has to find the right people that can do those jobs for him, those jobs with him, and that can be fixed. But it needs to be fixed. It's not an impossible task. It doesn't mean DOD is not doing its job, but you can't not fix that aspect of it. So a little bit of fault on both sides. Hegseth needs to fix the problem, but the press is really beating this drum way louder, and as more of a catastrophic situation than it has. Waltz was right. If you compare it to the previous Department of Defense, which everybody's, they were grown-ups. No, they weren't. They were completely incompetent people who somehow a former four-star general didn't realize he was supposed to let people know when he went to the hospital.
Right.
I mean, come on. That's insanity.
Yeah. Here's the I mean, I agree with where you're taking this, which is, yes, of course it's overblown because the media is going to take everything it can to, blow it out of proportion to the detriment of the Trump administration. That's what they do. They're the comm shop for the other party. I got it. But Hegseth, these are like guys that worked with him for a decade, going back to like Concerned Veterans of America. I mean, we've heard from some of these guys like Caldwell and the press guy. They don't strike me as enemies inside the perimeter. So you hired them and you fired them. So you made a mistake on one side or the other of that relationship. And then I don't know that I really believe, and there's certainly been no evidence presented. I know there's this ongoing investigation, the typical D.C. ongoing investigation, that these guys were guilty of leaking any information, and Caldwell has flatly denied it, talking to any reporters. He did an interview with Tucker Carlson. It would have been a lot better and probably a lot more contained if he had said, whatever, philosophical differences. These are at-will employees, and I needed to make a change at my senior staff level. That's on me. These are my guys. There's no ill will, but I need a different sort of different sorts of skill sets or different sorts of people around me to accomplish what we're setting out, and I just needed to make a change. And so to the extent that I made a misjudgment with the guys I hired in the first place, well, yeah, at least I'm making the course correction, and it would have been over. But when you do this, it's a hoax. These guys were leakers. I owe no duty to protect them. I have to protect the country. I don't know. I'm just not sold.
Yeah, I'm with you. He could have handled this better, and if he doesn't handle it better, it will hamstring his tenure as the SecDef and cause a big problem. If he had differences with those guys when they were doing the jobs they were in now, which frankly has nothing to do with past relationships, nothing to do with their abilities. Look, the Department of Defense is a gigantic bureaucracy and organization, and no one, save someone who has done that job before, has the experience to really get it right instinctively. But some people can pull it off, others don't, and they need to move on. I'm with you. If his judgment was these people needed to move on, it's okay to fire people when you're the SecDef. It happens all the time. And it doesn't mean they're morally flawed or anything else. If they're just not doing the job effectively, they need to go do something else, and you find somebody who will do it. But, again, this may show Hegseth's inexperience, that he feels he's got to do it with all the political spin on it instead of doing it as the head of, one of the biggest departments in the government. That takes some maturity, and it's got nothing to do with age. It just has to do with mature, experienced, bureaucratic warfare. And I'm not sure, Pete's not showing that he's doing that well yet. Hopefully he will get to that point. But you're right. You can't blame everything on the press. It's not all their fault. They just like to jump on a bad situation and make it worse.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks as always.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Whew. That shot was money, Lisa. Hey, speaking of, did you ever figure out what to do with your parents' old coin collection?
Not yet. I need a reputable dealer to appraise them. I have no clue what they're worth.
I just finished working on my dad's estate collections. I took it all to Fox Valley Coins. Their customer service was the best. Plus, they're super honest and reputable, but most importantly, experienced. They'll give you the best prices.
Really? They handle estate collections?
Absolutely. Buying, selling, appraising, they do it all. It was quick and simple, and we maintained our privacy. Fox Valley Coins made the whole process easy.
That's exactly what I need. Are they local?
Right in Naperville. They have an easy website to remember. FoxValleyCoins.com.
Perfect. Now let's see if you can return this shot.
Whether buying or selling or just want valuation, Fox Valley Coins is your trusted gold and silver dealer. Visit Fox Valley Coins, 1 light north of I-88 on Route 59 at the Naperville-Warrenville border. FoxValleyCoins.com.